episode 50 of Rest in Pitch Face. We're joined by Russell Oakley, who's the Managing Director of the Go Network.
That's right.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in. So, obviously very well positioned to give some insights into agency pitching.
Well, let's see, hopefully.
For context, it'd be good to just get a little bit of an understanding about Go.
Yeah, of course, yeah, no problem.
What you do there, what the service is, and then we'll dig into some of the contributing factors that come along with the wonderful pitching process.
Absolutely. So Go, we are a marketing intermediary based over in Manchester. We ultimately match brands to agencies. We do that by helping brands to collaboratively write a brief, understand exactly what their objectives are, what they're trying to achieve, where their roster stands at that current moment, and then take all that information in terms of what's important to them, what's desirable, what's preferred, out to a network of agencies that we represent to then match them back. We then run the pitch process all the way through, from diarising those pitches, helping them set agendas, understanding who's meeting who and making sure they turn up, all the way through to then verbal appointment, which is where we leave the process. So that's sort of the model that we have. We work with agencies across all marketing disciplines. We work with brands across pretty much every sector. Prior to that, which hopefully stands me in good stead as well, to see it from both sides of the fence, I was worked in business development for a long time for agencies, mostly creative and content agencies, a variety of them from small independents through to much larger agencies. But I hope and I feel that it stands me in good stead to remember what it was like to pitch as an agency, not just be the middleman, and to a certain degree have a bit of a back seat as we do now. Yep.
I think obviously the industry has changed significantly. I think challenging 3 years, COVID, cost of living, all that kind of stuff. We've always had a lot of discussion. Obviously, the name of the podcast is Rest in Pitch Face for a reason. We've always had the discussions around the place of a pitch, both in terms of clients having the capability of validating a partner, and then on the other side of it, what's involved from an agency's perspective. I guess from your point of view, having sat on both sides, do you feel like there's been any evolution, certainly in the last couple of years, in terms of how brands are viewing that as a process?
From our side, when we decided to set up Go, and when I say we, my brother and I are co-founders of Go, one of the main reasons for doing it, there was a number. One of the main reasons for doing it was I had been, as I say, in business development roles and therefore involved in pitches for a number of agencies for a number of years, and my experience of intermediaries, potentially because I didn't win that many through them, was not particularly positive. Some of those were down to the factors of it was a very competitive landscape down in London. I always felt sometimes that it was about who you knew, a lot of back scratching, and potentially about the fact that there was just too many agencies involved in a process. So one of the things, and Gaz and I chatted this through obviously at length before we decided to launch Go, was how are we going to be different? How are we going to make the experience enjoyable and fair for both sides? And we always knew that we wanted Go to be an agnostic player in this market, in the sense of we would represent the right agencies for the right brands, and it was up to those parties to decide who was right for who. We were just there to facilitate that introduction. I think what that therefore means is my experience to a certain degree from how pitching has changed was looking back in that sort of 10 years or so that I had when I was pitching myself. I don't ever feel like it massively changed in terms of, it was ultra competitive. You didn't really know who you were up against, but you knew there was probably quite a few others going for it. You got enough information to put a pitch together, but maybe quite limited information in hindsight. What we've tried to do is, and it fell nicely with the launch of the Pitch Positive Pledge middle of last year, was try to make that process a lot as fair as we possibly can, to educate brands and to help steer brands in terms of how we can make that fair, in terms of things that are just, really easy to put in, that ultimately means that the agencies can genuinely go for a pitch with sort of as much gusto as they need to, without thinking we're wasting time or we're being taken for a ride or what have you. So I hope and agencies can tell me really. I hope that's how the pitching sort of world has changed. It's how we're trying to sort of facilitate that change, is to educate both sides, make it much more of a fairer, enjoyable process. From the brand side, we get told quite often that we turn what is quite an arduous process quite often into a lot more enjoyable process. From the agency side, albeit sort of quite a lot of different feedback we get from agencies involved in pitches with us. One of the threads that we hook onto is that they get a lot of information to make a decision on whether they should go for it, and also that we are organised and our communication is high. I think that's one of the areas where, that's a no-brainer. That it doesn't cost anything for us to be organised and to communicate well, and I think that's important to agencies. Know where you stand. Again, that was one of the other things that when I was pitching, and it might be the same for yourselves, is if you don't get told what's going to happen next, or there's just weeks of silence, or that's what induces stress in the process, and you start to lose interest, or you start to sort of think that you're being taken for a ride. Those are really easy fixes for us, and we've tried to do them from day one, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think that with pitching, in terms of obviously being sat on the agency side, knowing what's involved, knowing the lengths that you go to, and obviously you're hinging on getting new business. You want to grow, you want to push things forward. In terms of the management of that, your side, have you had any feedback or situations where you've spoke to people post pitch where they've had a bit more of a grievance with the process in general? Because I know there's a movement around to pitch or not to pitch. A lot of agencies are now starting to think about whether they put a line in the sand and say, look, we don't enter competitive pitches because of what comes with it.
Yeah. I think it all starts ultimately with the client. Ultimately, the brand are in charge of ultimately the budget. They're in charge of the timescales to a certain degree. And for us, a big part of what we do is getting the brands buy into what is, as I said before, what is fair and what you can expect from a pitch process, so that it's a win-win-win for every party. Now, ultimately, they're probably going to only appoint one agency, and if they run a competitive pitch, that means that there will be agencies who are in that pitch who ultimately aren't successful. More agencies than are, of course. So what we try and do is get the brands buy-in as early as possible, and I think to a certain degree we have some nice tools up our sleeve to be able to do this, one of which being that we don't cost a brand anything to help them with this process, is we say, look, in return for it being free, in return for us doing all this work, we need you to buy into what we consider a positive pitch experience for the agencies involved, so that no one leaves the process thinking, that was a waste of time. Now, we have to admit we don't get that right every time. Sometimes we are hamstrung by the brand just saying, no, we have to have an agency in place in the next fortnight, and therefore, we've got to get everything done in the next 2 weeks. It's completely unrealistic for that to happen. But if the brand are saying it's either that or nothing, we at some stage have to make a call of like, well, who are we to say to the agencies we represent, well, it was a 2-week turnaround, so sorry, we decided that you guys shouldn't go for that. What we tend to do is say, look, we've done everything we can to turn this into a 6-week pitch process, which probably for this hypothetical brief it should have been, but it's a 2-week process. It's up to you guys. We're not happy with it, but that's just the lay of the land. But we've tried everything we can. The brand has to, have got their reasons for doing this. It's up to you guys whether we put that pressure onto you. And obviously, we can't strong arm any agency into going for a pitch they don't want to. So I think that's the first point, is that getting the brand on side and getting the brand bought into the reasons that we put a process in like we do is critical to the success. Then obviously it passes on to how an agency what an agency does with the information in terms of the amount of stress on their side.
In terms of education, obviously you're engaging the brand before the brand engages the agency. Is there a process that's followed whereby you're trying to give as much depth of information in terms of what A, the brand should expect, but also B, what's involved from an agency to formulate a proposal and go in and actually deliver? Yeah,
absolutely. I think it would be harsh to suggest that clients turn a blind eye to that. I don't think they're completely naive to think, oh, well, it doesn't matter how much work the agency's got to do. We want what we want, and we'll get what we want. I think more and more, probably where the industry is evolving, is brands are putting consideration on that, and obviously now sort of understanding with reports like the one that we were discussing in terms of mental health stresses that come into pitching. I think brands are sitting up and taking note that we can't expect too much, even more so in terms of actually potentially paying agencies for the work that they do when it gets to final pitch, I think is becoming more and more prevalent and more of an easier conversation to have, certainly from our seat. So yeah, it's education to a certain degree, not in a patronising way, but to brands and the people we work with, the stakeholders within brands, they've got their own pressures on them. They've got to get 100%. The most out of obviously their budget and their role, and they need the right agency. I think having hopefully an independent partner like ourselves can just mean that some of the things that they wouldn't have put as much weight or as much consideration to maybe just come a bit more to the forefront.
Yeah, and spinning that back to agencies, do you feel like that agencies could do a better job of being a bit more transparent about that in terms of how they prepare for a pitch and what goes into that? Yeah,
I think you have to be a little bit careful that doesn't come across as poor us, if that's not a bit harsh.
100%.
I think the challenge that I would see if I was in your shoes as an agency owner is it's really, really tempting to go for, it's such a competitive industry that we work in, it's really tempting to go for anything and everything. And there are agencies that still do that. I think the process that Go have put together is to try and cut that out wherever possible. We don't actually really allow it. Our process doesn't really allow for it, because what we do is give as much clear qualification criteria as possible, so that understanding, and obviously you need time to assess that criteria and to look at it, as much brand background information as possible, even back to the reason that this brief has come about, not just what the brief is, but what's caused the brief, is that you've got to get yourselves to a point as an agency, in my opinion, that you are really, really bought into this brief. You understand why it's happening. You're confident that the budget has been signed off, that the timescales are what they say they are. You've got all the information to make a genuine call that, do you know what, we want to go for this one.
Yep.
What you then have to do is go into it optimistic, of course, but with that understanding that worst case scenario, we don't win it. Now, how much you invest in terms of time and ultimately money into that. If I was in your shoes as an agency owner, that's where you've got to either make a call on a case by case basis, or going into an annual new business strategy, you've almost got to say, right, we've got this pot of money this year that ultimately we will spend on trying to win new clients and trying to win pitches. It's then obviously taking on a case by case basis as the briefs come in, is right, are we going to allot some of that budget to this one, and what's the reason for doing that? Well, hopefully it's because we've really looked at it and we've given it the time and the depth. Time's a huge part of this. Time is a huge part, and we try and give agencies as much time as we can for them to analyse the brief, discuss it internally, really work out whether it's the right opportunity for them. Where we get most pushback from agencies when they're not happy with us, believe it or not, is when that is rushed, when they're like, well, hang on, we're in a position here where you're almost sort of forcing us to make a decision in 48 hours. We need more time to understand whether it's right. And I sympathise with that, because I think that is what's crucial to a certain degree to you guys then enjoying the process. Because if you're all bought in, what the worst case scenario could be, is that you don't win. What ultimately you're going to almost allow in terms of spend or resource to try and win that opportunity. Then I think that hopefully will relieve some of the burden to just actually go then and enjoy it and try your best to try and win it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing from an agent, my perspective, an agency owner's perspective, is that when I'm considering these processes, it's a consideration that how much time and therefore resource gets allocated, but also the impact that has on the people. Yeah. So if we're going to go, and we're going to be 100%. We want to win it. We want to go in. I think going in with the view, whilst having an awareness that you might not win it, going in with the view of anything other than that you are going to win it is the wrong approach. But I think that consideration of everybody that's going to be involved is going to throw everything and be personally invested in that process. And I've been in pitch situations at previous agencies where that weight, that pressure has pushed me to the point of having a panic attack. I know the worst case scenario of that. So when we started out, and as we go through more and more pitch processes, the consideration for us and me personally is, are the people that are going to be put against this pitch capable of, and do they have the tools from us to deal with the worst case scenario? Yeah. And then that helps us navigate whether we're going to allocate the time or not.
It's undoubtedly harder for smaller agencies. You guys are obviously of a size where hopefully that that pressure is spread out a bit more evenly. I do sympathise with, you know, smaller, when I say smaller, potentially sort of under 10 person agencies where, you know, just the impact of picking the wrong opportunity to go for if you don't win it is so much bigger. Potentially, you know, the impact the other way in terms of if you do win this client, it's going to be, you know, game changing for that agency. That's where it becomes, you know, I can see how the snowball effect sort of comes into play there. And as an agency, you are really putting everything on this one pitch. Then I think it does become unhealthy. Now, you know, that's a luxury that the bigger an agency gets, the bigger that luxury gets, I think, is you can, to a certain extent, pick and choose. You can, you know, you can almost relax. So it's not the worst case scenario. It's not the end of the world if we don't win it. That's a nice position to be in.
Definitely.
But at the same time, it's for a very select few, unfortunately.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think pivoting back to the charging for that process, how much are you seeing of that? Where, like, I'm hearing it a lot, where opportunities are coming up and agencies are being quite upfront and saying, look, and these are agencies that have a really good understanding of time taken to go into a pitch, produce a pitch, deliver it. So they're then putting a cost against that, almost like a research discovery phase. Is that becoming more prevalent?
More prevalent, potentially a bit strong, but we certainly feel confident, and our guys feel more confident suggesting it or potentially sort of offering it as one way to go. If it tends to be a final pitch only, you know, I don't think we've had a scenario where agencies have just been pitched straight off the bat to you know, attend a chemistry call, for example. But we've had a number now where it's got to the final pitch and it's, you know, it's been a close call thing, and the brand, I won't say who, but the brand has come to us and said, do you know what, we need to see more, but we appreciate that's going to be more time, more effort, and therefore we're willing to allot some of the original budget to actually paying the two agencies to come and do almost a rerun of a final pitch, which obviously is great, is fair, and I think hopefully, you know, softens the blow for the agency out of those two that doesn't win ultimately. I don't think it's, to your word, I don't think it's prevalent. I don't think brands go in with a budget for we're going to run a pitch. I think they probably see it as, okay, to start again, we have, or I've heard a lot of agency owners, potentially some disgruntled agency owners or agency owners who've got to a point where they're a bit disillusioned with the whole pitch process, where they're saying, well, we now win business by a brand will come to us and they'll almost take us on a trial basis and pay us for 3 months, see if we do a good job, and if not, then they'll find another agency, and if so, then obviously they'll keep us on. It's just unrealistic for many brands. Again, maybe that luxury sort of top tier of brands, but under that, it's unrealistic for brands to say, you know, yeah, we'll pay you for 3 months and, you know, let's see how it goes. And how do you pick the agency that you're going to take on a trial? Well, you've got to run some sort of pitch then, or analysis at least to, okay, those are probably the agencies that we're going to take on a paid trial. So unfortunately, and, you know, as an owner of an intermediary, you probably wouldn't expect me to say anything else, but unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I don't see the traditional pitch going away, unless I've never heard of a alternative scenario, which in my opinion is any better or fairer than the one that we currently run. You know, I've likened it before to how you pick any service. You know, if for whatever reason you needed to put a parent into a care home, you know, you're going to compare 3 or 4 care homes. You're not going to put them into a care home for 3 months and you know, pay for that service while they're in the care home to then take them out and, okay, we'll try another one now. So it's like, and you can, you know, that's probably quite a bad analogy, but there is plenty of analogies there that, and similarities of any other service where it might not be as formal a pitch as what it is in our industry, but it is a pitch of sorts, in that you are comparing and you know, analysing and then therefore choosing the right service for you.
Yeah. Do you think there will ever be a stage where there's an evolution in that process? I know there's events and there's things like speed dating events and things like that, where it's a bit more of a informal pre-qualification. Do you think that will become a route that brands will want to take?
If they can still get to the end conclusion of getting the right service provider, then of course, and we're always as a intermediary, and hopefully a forward-thinking intermediary, trying to think of what else can we put in. You know, we have run a number of pitches over the last 12 months where we've added an additional stage to the process where we really strongly encourage the brand to go and visit each of the agencies that we're still left in. Certainly from a cultural and communication and sort of account management fit. Sometimes all the pitches are either run at the brand's headquarters, a lot of them run virtually now, and it's not until they're actually working together that you go and see the space and see them in their own habitat. I think that's really important. Well, there's one way that we try and, again, sort of informalise it or just make it a bit more of an enjoyable process, a bit more fair. The brand's got to get on the road for a change as opposed to the agencies. So it's things like that. I mean, that's a small example, but I'm sure others will come in terms of how can we make this more fair, how can we make it more enjoyable, not just do pitch processes or different stages of the pitch process for the sake of it. No one's got enough time for that. But things that potentially, just even the balance of power a little bit between brands and agencies. I personally don't think that yet. As I say, I'm open to ideas, but I've not heard any other way of replacing the pitch process with anything where I think, well, of course, it was staring us in the face all along. That's the way that we should run a pitch. Because ultimately, if you really boil it down to brass tacks, what needs to happen is a brand has to see a selection of agencies that are, qualification is crucial in this. It's one of the ways that we do it massively is that we tend to cap it at sort of 4, 5, 6 agencies max that are even going to be in the process, because anything more than that, you're wasting potentially more people's time, and also, they don't need to see more than 5 or 6. No. Again, if I take it back to my probably pretty average analogy, you wouldn't go and see 10 care homes. If you were looking for a care home, you'd probably see 3 or 4. So I think that is one of the ways that we save agencies is time. Other than that, it's then got to be a case of, okay, that's the options in front of me. I'm going to have to narrow those down, and then I'm going to have to get real confident, because ultimately quite often there's a lot at stake for the brand as well, in terms of the amount they're going to spend, the amount of trust, the even from an individual position of their own role and the pressure, and how they're going to be judged on this appointment. There's quite a lot at stake for them as well. Ultimately, they have to have confidence that they're appointing the right agency. Hopefully we help with that, but at the same time, if we're not involved, if you're not running a pitch, how else do you get that confidence? That's
it's definitely a necessity. Do you think that there's anything from a brand perspective and an agency perspective, sort of same question, that either party could be doing more to help with the process?
Yes, I think some of the things that come up a lot in terms of how they can make it life easier for each other. We've touched on some of them. Genuine qualification of an opportunity, I think, is absolutely critical. I think it's easier for the bigger brands, but for some of the smaller or lesser well-known brands still have the genuine need and still have the genuine budget, is to do your background checks, is to really understand what that brand's about, who they've worked with in the past, potentially speak to some of those agencies who potentially have been in on that roster before, looking at their business performance, looking at their output, their agency history, etc. I think all helps to give an agency confidence that we're not going to be wasting our time here. That in itself, of course, takes time, but sometimes it's better to take that short-term pain for longer-term gain, again, of everything checks out about these guys. That's due diligence we do. If we're involved in the process, one of the hopefully selling points of using an intermediary like us is we do all that due diligence before we start working with any brand anyway, to take confidence. Then it's about, in my opinion, being clear, really, really clear about what the brand wants to see. I harking back to my own experience, I remember going into so many pitches where ultimately I was thinking, I hope this is right. I hope this is going to resonate. And you shouldn't. It's hard if the brand isn't forthcoming.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think sometimes the clients that we work with see that as, well, we don't want to give them the answers. And we're like, that's not about giving them the answers. Yeah. It's about giving them opportunity to show you what you ultimately what you want to see, and their take on that. So again, that's where we encourage brands to not set a really rigid, strict agenda. Also, don't set an agenda that's really woolly and it's like what they're trying to get at here. But just give them, thought starter points. That will mean that the agency ultimately comes in and gives a good presentation. It might not be the winning presentation, but it's going to be a good presentation. It's going to be a good pitch. I think those are 3 easy ones. I think where the agency can make it easy for themselves, and again, just all trying to make the process, once you're in it, as enjoyable as possible, knowing that this is definitely a pitch we want to go for. The brand is definitely a brand we want to work with. We understand what they want to see, so we're on the right road. We won't be even if we lose, we won't be miles off. From a brand perspective, without a doubt, the thing I think that we push hardest on and is non-negotiable in our process is giving feedback to every agency that's involved. I think it's polite if nothing else. That if you lose, and again, we've been all been in that situation. It's one thing losing and knowing why you lost and understanding the reasons, and quite often it's subjective, but you have to take that on the chin, and for whatever reason it didn't land, or it didn't quite land quite as well as the agency that did win it. It's another thing being told that you've lost and just having no idea why. That leaves a bad taste. So it's a non-negotiable for us, and that goes right all the way back to, even if we put an agency forward and endorse an agency for an opportunity, and for whatever reason, and it's rare, they don't even get invited to chemistry call, we insist that the brand gives the agency feedback as to why they've not been invited to chemistry call, what it was that they didn't like, the cut their jib for whatever reason, and that's all the way through. The feedback understandably gets more and more thorough the longer the process goes on, but to the point that if you are, the unfortunate second place of a final two of a big pitch, that feedback is, we ask for that feedback to be really detailed and also genuine, not just sort of paying lip service, but and we pass that on direct. All our feedback forms and surveys that go out to the brands we work with has got it very clearly stated that this feedback will go directly from you directly to the agency that's receiving it. We're not going to put our take on it or put our spin on it or soften the blow for the agency. So write it as though you're talking to the agency, and I think that's it's, as I say, it's non-negotiable in our process for the brand to do that.
The value that feedback brings is exponential as well. Like when you go into a process and you've put your heart and soul into it, and even if you don't win it, that feedback is just validation that you've showed up, you've done a fairly decent job, I imagine, if you're through to final pitch. So I think that is something, in my experience, that brands could do a better job of. Being a bit more forthright, I think, with that feedback at the end is super important for the people that you're not carrying through.
No, absolutely. I think the other thing that we get feedback from agencies that is stress-inducing is clarity or moving of the timescales and the goalpost to a certain sense. The goalpost less so in the sense that we do have briefs that unfortunately evolve, or maybe fortunately evolve as the process is going on, but it's a lot more rare. What isn't unfortunately rare, however hard our guys work, is that, we've put these dates in for final pitch and unfortunately they're going to have to move, or can you do the afternoon as opposed to the morning because so and so. Now, of course, there are circumstances, we're all human beings, where those are, out of everyone's control, and yes, of course we are flexible, but what we say to the brand up front, to the point that, having done it for 5 years now, we ask them about, can you please check everyone who's involved's holidays? Can you please check any school holidays in terms of childcare, so that we're not moving these things for really, experience should have told us that, well, if we're running a pitch during half term, there's a likelihood that this could move. So, again, I think that is all just easy things that just hopefully remove, certainly not all of the stress, but some of the parts of the stress for an agency of a pitch process that are, again, easy wins, as I talked about before, in terms of organisation and communication. We give our guys a hard time if they don't spot one of those. If for whatever reason a pitch is moving because we didn't realise it's a bank holiday weekend and therefore we're going to have to move them, that's not good enough from our side. We should be spotting them. We should be experienced enough to spot those. Not moving the goalposts, or trying not to move the goalposts halfway through a pitch or at any stage of a pitch is obviously an important one. Yeah,
it is. I think transparency is key, isn't it? And keeping everybody in the loop on that. And I think that's where someone like Go comes in. That intermediary, making sure that everybody's in the loop, goes quite a long way. I've got a myth that I might want you to bust.
Go for it.
So, obviously I've been in the industry for longer than I care to admit, but I've seen and I've heard similar things around brands pulling agency pitches together in a way that they gather the information, they get agencies to pitch, and then they take the findings and then they'll either roll them out themselves, or they'll freelance it, or they'll just basically take the strategy and run with it.
Yeah.
Have you, in your experience pre-Go, seen that?
Definitely.
And then and then in your experience since Go, have you come across a brand that's approached you and sort of done that process?
The most confidence I can give you is we're very aware that it could happen.
Yep.
And yeah, as I said, I certainly feel as though it happened to me when I was pitching. I'm sure you've got plenty of examples as well. One or two where I definitely have proof it happened. But we can only do as much as we can do. Well, the confidence I can give in terms of probably not busting the myth, but giving you confidence that intermediaries, or certainly us as an intermediary, are aware of that potential for that to happen, is that we ask all the questions we possibly can and are so thorough before we agree to run a search and appointment process for a brand. And those are, really understanding. I feel it happens most, or could happen, likelihood it could happen most commonly if they're trying to sharpen the pencil of the incumbent, whereby the incumbent's been with them for 3 years, potentially is getting a bit comfy in terms of not they don't feel as though they're being serviced how they were in year one of the relationship.
Yeah.
You then potentially see brands thinking, okay, well, we'll get them to sit up, we'll tell them that they're part of a pitch process. If that is the case, we've got almost set questions now to ask in terms of putting to the brand, okay, what is going on with the incumbent? Tell us why you're not happy with them. Tell us give us examples of what they've potentially done wrong. All under NDA, of course. We make it clear that this isn't a therapy session that we're going to report back to the incumbent about what they're doing wrong, but it does give them and us the opportunity to say, do you know what, actually, from everything you've said there, there's not a lot wrong with your existing relationship. So are you sure you want to run a pitch? And if so, what is your justification for running a pitch? And we have had occasions, albeit rare, where they've said, do you know what, actually, we'll leave this for another 6 months. We might come back to you in 6 months, but there's probably reasons there that we shouldn't be running a pitch. Now, whether that means that we've found them out, that they were going to do what you've described there, I'm not too sure. The other things there are to just, probably about quite a lot of what we've already talked about, is to just try and make it the balance of power a lot more fair in terms of just don't take the mick. If we swap seats for a second, brand and agency, would you like it if someone was coming to your brand and saying, okay, show us what you're about. We're not going to use you or pay you to do it, but show us what you're about. And if you've got any good ideas, then maybe we'll take them. And everyone's human at the end of the day. The right sort of people will sit up and think, to be fair, we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. It's very hard to prove that it happens. I think we all have been in the industry long enough to suspect that it does. I'd probably say some of the more inexperienced brands who haven't run a pitch before, the temptation would be bigger for them to do something like that. But we can only do so much, but take faith that we do as much as we can to try and stop that from ever happening.
Yeah. And just to take your phrase there, taking the mick, what would you say the or if any has been the biggest occurrence of a brand looking at taking the mick?
It tends to always come across as accidental, in that maybe it is, maybe it isn't. When I say that, I mean we've run brief processes, we've done all our due diligence, and we were obviously more susceptible to it in our first couple of years as a business, where whilst not learning the ropes, we were probably not as wise as we are. As we've run 650 odd briefs now. In the first sort of 50 briefs, we probably could have easily fall into the traps. But we have had occasions where, a brand has told us everything we want to hear. Yeah, the brief signed off, the budget signed off, it's ready to go. We want to use you guys exclusively to help us find this agency. Music to my ears, and then 3 or 4 weeks in, it's like, well, actually, before we meet agencies, I need to speak to the owner or the CEO. Or whatever. Like, well, hang on, you told us that bit was signed off. Why are we only finding that out now? Our model is the reason that we've got so good at that is our model is all based on the fact that we do all the work up front before we get paid. So we can't afford to fall into many of those traps. If we run a brief and for whatever reason at the very last minute the plug's pulled, we could have done 2-3 months of work for zero reward. There's nothing better than the knowledge of that, or that happening once to make you realise that it can't happen again. So I don't think anyone comes into attempting to take the mick out of us. I just think sometimes they maybe don't put the value on our service as much as we would like them to. We've got better not making too many false starts with things like that, I'd say.
Time wasting, essentially.
Time wasting, yeah. As I say, I don't think anyone's hopefully overt enough to be like, I'm going to go and waste their time for a
Yeah.
little bit. You don't know these days, but I don't think so. But inadvertently potentially wasting our time. We've got good at spotting how they could potentially waste our time. It tends to be shifting the goalposts. The other big one is, I want to meet 4 agencies through you guys. Please put the best 4 forward. This is the brief. We've done all the work. And then at the 11th hour saying, actually, a friend of my daughter's mum's works for an agency and they're a really good fit for this, so we're going to meet them as well. Okay, well, it's your prerogative to meet whichever agencies you want to meet. But we do, again, obviously try and guard against that in the sense of the referrals are all well and good, but you've done a lot of due diligence with us, you've done a lot of work with us to understand exactly what you're looking for. Have you done that with this agency that has just been played into you? There's not a lot we can do about those. They still happen every now and then.
Yeah, you're never going to catch them all.
No, unfortunately not.
So, we like to end on this or that,
Okay.
is how we label it. So, quick fire questions, yes or no. I do a historically bad job of answering these off the bat, and I'm normally told off for sitting on the fence on some of them. So, first one is pitch or proposal.
I've made a bad start because I'm going to ask, is it in terms of context?
So I guess pitch would be going through to presentation stage, presenting.
Yep.
Proposal would be written version.
The pitch every time, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. LinkedIn or Twitter or X?
LinkedIn. Boring answer there, isn't it? But
I agree with that as well. Android or iOS?
Oh, iOS, yeah. I've never done anything other.
Hollywood brand or challenger brand?
Challenger brand, definitely.
Nice. Why?
Just the excitement, yeah. I think we're a challenger in our space in terms of the intermediary space. I think just I don't know, my personality or values maybe sort of align better with a challenger brand's outlook.
I agree with that. There's a lot of excitement that comes with challenger brands.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like being the underdog.
Yep, I agree with that. Long-term return or short-term high-value project?
Long-term return. It's got to be
Okay. Tea or coffee?
tea. Yeah. It's gotta be
How
tea.
do you have it?
Builder's tea.
Builder's
Builder's tea, but then wheat coffee.
What bag?
Yorkshire. Yeah.
Yorkshire.
Yeah, I was brought
Did
from
I need to ask?
Brought from Wakefield. So, yeah.
Winning a competitive pitch or an existing client contract extension?
Ooh. New pitch, yeah.
New
You
pitch.
shouldn't really say that, I don't think. I wouldn't recommend any agency says that, but yeah, I would want new pitch.
I always think that that's a really tricky one because they're both great, aren't they, at the end of the day? But they both deliver different things.
Yeah, and loyalty's got to come into it for the existing one in terms of if a relationship's going well, brilliant, we get to keep that relationship going. From my seat as an intermediary, it's got to be new, yeah.
Spotify or Apple Music?
Spotify, yeah, only one I use.
Perfect. That's it. Russell, thank
Easy
you very
peasy.
much.
No, I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.